From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse podcast. I'm Jason Tanoory, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, welcome back. Dr. Jason here, Dental Lighthouse podcast. Super excited about my guest today. Little backstory, little context. Dr. Davis and I have been working together off and on for almost 2 years now. I would guess. I'll have to verify that with the brain trust when we get him on. But in some coaching capacity, really just allowing him to kind of just run wild and me maybe painting some boundaries and just say, well, maybe you should consider this, or maybe you should consider that. But he's just got like a really, really cool story of this growth mindset and then second guessing himself and then, pivoting and trying something else and then ultimately ending up at the place that he's at. And I really think that there's a lot of great lessons that we can learn from his experience. And then at the same time, he is in no way arrived, so to speak. So he's trying to figure out what his next steps are. So I thought it would be awesome to have him on the podcast and just unpack his story a little bit. What can we learn from it? What landmines can we avoid based on his experiences? And then most importantly, what's next for him? And just a conversation that I really feel that could benefit any of us, no matter where we're at in our professional or personal life. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to Dental Lighthouse podcast show, Dr. Talon Davis. Talon, how you doing, brother?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm really, really good. I'm really, really good. So, again, that intro just had to give a little bit of a backdrop, a little context to what we're going to talk about today. But I would love for you to unpack the last couple of years for our audience and give them a little bit of clarity on where you came from all the way up to where we are now.
Yeah. So, the story started with me in a 3-op, we called it the shoebox in my first location where, I graduated from school, bought the office within a year of graduation, grew it as much as possible, added another operatory, figured out during COVID that, I didn't really like how reliant it all was upon me to make sure everything was going well and all the production. And so we sought out the opportunity to either move the office or merge a couple of years after buying it. And so we found a great opportunity that was actually closer to my home in kind of late 2020, early 2021. Moved to the practice, had some pretty incredible explosive growth when we did that. In the vein of me wanting to not be the sole provider, we hired an associate that was with us for 13 months. That were the practice grew quite a bit in that period. My income grew as well, and my free time, I would say, also grew during that period. But I wasn't really happy. I was pretty frustrated. The associate was not really who we were looking for, kind of long term, and so I ended up making a lot of headaches. And more headaches than positives. And I ended up having to do, essentially redo almost all of the work that the associate had done. And so after we had let him go, I sort of had a period where I was still kind of committed to group practice and still wanted to make sure that I was, trying to grow in that sort of way. And so we hired another associate. It did not, again, end up going so well, but it was only a 6-month term this time. So we were able to hire slow and fire fast in this faster, I should say, in this scenario. And then, after that, I kind of had to figure out, is an associate ever going to make me happy? Is a large team, is group practice really what I want? Is this an issue where I'm not the kind of leader I need to be? Is this, I don't like having all these people, or is it, I just don't have the right people on the bus, that sort of thing. So at that time, I decided to go back to solo or super duper solo, you might call it. And I would say, I think we did that for about 10 months before my neck had a conversation with me about my ability to do this, for the next 10 or 15 years, that sort of thing. And physically and mentally, was it worth all the strain that I was going through? Because we were on pace to do about 3 million with one provider at that point. And as you know, Jason, that's not a small amount of dentistry. You've got to be busy and you've got to be getting a lot done to be that productive. And so we ended up kind of leaving the super duper solo route again and putting out an ad for an associate. But this time I would say that I did it very slowly. I think it took from the time the ad went out to the time the associate started like 6 months of really in-depth processes and trying to vet and make sure that we got the right person in that spot. And I think we were immensely successful. I think my associates averaged something like 115,000 in production a month for his first four to 5 months, which is more than we could have ever hoped or dreamed for him. He's been a real leader in the practice, and the practice itself is doing better than it ever has. Things feel very stable. I'm working, the least I've worked in a very long time, and there's a very clear trajectory for the office for a true kind of self-managing organization that takes care of itself and has appropriate systems and processes to continue to grow, with me in a kind of true visionary role, just kind of directing the ship and getting things exactly where we want them to be. All of that said, I find myself at this point in my ownership journey having flip-flopped several times and been all over the place, wishy-washy, and just really trying to figure out what my home is going to be in dentistry, projecting forwards and looking into the future over the next year or two and beyond that, trying to figure out what is my role really going to be in this office, in this industry, and what am I going to be able to do to fill my time in an effective way? Because it's great to have the ability to have all this freedom and to free up all this time, but if you don't have really something that's meaningful and powerful to use the time for, I don't think that I'm going to really enjoy the necessarily enjoy the freedom that I've gained. As I was saying earlier, there's only so much golf that I want to play. There's only so many Lego kits I want to put together, and my daughter's in school, so there's not unlimited time to spend with her and that sort of thing. And I've done a great job of segregating my life so that all my family time is protected and I'm getting as much of that as possible. But I just know that a year from now, I'm going to find myself with a tremendous amount of extra time, and not really the strong desire or indicators or motivations to put it in any particular direction, which is a very new thing for me. So I want to get your insights as to what could be next.
Yeah, that's first off, congratulations, man. That's been quite a journey over the last couple of years, and I'm really, really happy with where you're at. There's a lot of threads that we can pull on in terms of what you just unpacked, and we won't get a chance to pull on them all, but I do want to pull on a few.
Yeah.
The original idea of grow, right? You and I have had these conversations offline, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost seemed like you were growing for the sake of growing because everyone else was growing, right? So it was like, wow, everyone else in this room is growing. I should probably grow too. Did you have that mindset, or was the mindset like from the get-go, we're just going to keep growing until we run into a wall?
Yeah, I think growth for the sake of growth is very much like the perfect summary of my first few years of entrepreneurship. I entered dentistry with the intention of owning a practice, from like pre-dent stage. I was on Dental Town, reading business books and all these things. And so, to say I was growth minded would understate it. And it wasn't until like a few years after owning and going through all this and really achieving a lot that I didn't really reflect on why are we growing? What's the rationale behind all of this? And so, I surrounded myself with all these growth oriented people, and it was like, well, these people are all happy and successful in the ways that I want to be. So let's model what they did, which on the face of it is just, well, just keep growing until you can't grow anymore. But in reality, there's probably, there's a lot more nuance to it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no question. So, growth for the sake of growing is a trap that many of us have fallen into, myself included. And I want to just unpack specifically where you decided that growth for the sake of growing was not the best strategy for you. So it happened to be, now please correct me if I'm wrong, it happened to be at a time where you were just simply growing frustrated with to use your term, the people on the bus. So what specifically was going through your mind when you were like, why am I even doing this? Why am I incurring this amount of brain damage when I could be doing something else?
Brain damage is a very accurate way of putting it. Yeah, so it was one of those things where, as a highly productive dentist, like your income potential in a small office with like a few staff is actually incredibly high, right? You can work not all that much and produce a lot of dentistry in a relatively short amount of time with a pretty small staff, and have a productive and meaningful career in dentistry. And in group practice, the amount of effort it takes to duplicate that is like 100 times the work. It's just much more. I like to say, if you double your team, you're quadrupling your trouble and that kind of thing, because there's just so many lines of communication that get crossed and all that stuff. And so it was at this point where I had two associates that had failed, and whether they had failed from their clinical skill or from my leadership inability or the mesh between the two. I had two associates that had failed, and I really hadn't seen the returns or the emotional and physical kind of mental rewards from having this really large and quote unquote impressive business and all these things. And so for me, like the tipping point is just like, I've done all of this work and, like you said, incurred all of this damage, and growth has gotten me to this point, right? This mindless effort and path towards growth has gotten me to this point of really quite considerable unhappiness, right? I was much less happy at that point in my ownership career than I had been in the shoebox and that sort of thing. And so it took some self-reflection and kind of projecting forwards and saying, 15 years from now, if I'm on this path still and still banging my head in the wall, and I'm going to run out of brains to damage, I'm going to run out of real estate here to work with, and so I just had to do something. It was almost like it wasn't even a choice for me, because I was so dissatisfied with the trajectory that I was on, that I couldn't see a way forward that at that moment involved group practice and happiness and me getting what I wanted. And so I just knew that something significant had to change at that point.
Yeah, I appreciate you unpacking that. I think sometimes as dentists, we just have this mindset that if some is good, then more is better. And when we finally decide to hit the pause button and really ask ourselves, what would truly make me happy? And it's usually some type of combination between this amount of income, this amount of time away from the office, and then to the point that you just unpacked, the ability to turn it off and to not have to think about all of the headaches that are waiting for me Monday morning, so to speak. And I think I know it's very commendable for you to kind of do that reflection, and then ultimately make a decision that goes against the grain when it comes to this concept of grow, right? And I think you and I had conversations probably over a year ago now, where with your skill set, and again, you're a phenomenal clinician, and I'm not trying to dismiss your ability to produce dentistry, but we're not talking about like 1%. I mean, we're talking, there's a lot of dentists out there that can say to themselves, okay, I have 6 ops, I have 3 hygienists, I have 3 assistants. As long as I am organized, I could do 15 grand a day. I could do 3 million a year, and I could take home half of that. And that's a pretty good lifestyle from a financial perspective. And it's also a good lifestyle from a lack of headaches perspective, because, to the point you're making, you have touch points with everybody on the team. You have touch points with every system. If something doesn't work right, you just deal with it right then and there, versus when you start to scale, it's a headache, right? It's more and more chaos. So I love the fact that you kind of pumped the brakes a little bit and then decided like, okay, I'm going to do this for a time. And then you ultimately did it successfully. Is it the injury or the starting of the prospective neck injury that kind of gave you the nudge to revisit the idea of bringing on another provider?
Yeah, absolutely. I just couldn't see that like long term physically that I was going to be able to. It didn't feel that I was going to be able to maintain that level. Um, and so there was a pivot point there, right? I had the option of like dropping insurance and you know getting smaller, while staying big and that sort of thing. And I had to just sort of decide: do I want to go that route, and do I feel like that's going to get me where I want to be, or do I want to go back to the group practice route and see if I can try it again? And the kind of thing that sold me on, giving group practice the third shot really was just thinking into the future. Like, what am I going to feel 20 years down the road if I reflect back on my time and know that I made the choice to not necessarily, and to be like not staying small, but to not take on this challenge and to say that this is really not something that I could work with to balance and all those sorts of things. And it just didn't seem to me, it didn't resonate in my mind that I would be happy with myself if I hadn't really given it 100% of my effort and 100% of my ability, and really taken, done the entire process in detail and in such detail that, I was certain that the outcome wasn't my fault or something like that. It's like how we talk about when we're firing people, it should never be a surprise. We should have done everything we can to retain them and all that kind of stuff. And I really didn't feel that I had done that in my group practice journey, that I had really just said, okay, we're going to do everything we can from the very beginning, the first step, to make sure that all of this goes as smoothly as it possibly could. And so it took, a long time to do all of that stuff in the right way, but I just couldn't see a combination of me physically holding up that long, and the combination of that plus me wanting really to achieve like my full potential as a human being on this earth, given the limited amount of time that I have. I couldn't see those two things meshing really well with me down the road and having me feeling truly fulfilled in my career like 20 years from now. I just couldn't, it didn't sound like something that Talon Davis would be happy with,
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome, man. So, some people are in your position and they want to bring on an associate because they want a little bit more freedom away from the chair. And I'm sure that was part of it. And some people are in your position and they want to bring on associates so they can, drive revenue and maybe have a little bit more profitability. And I'm sure that was part of it too. But it sounds to me like the number one factor was this quest of like, I'm better than my history, and I know I can do this. Almost like hold my beer while I do this. And I love that motivation. That's more motivating than anything. Obviously money's important and time away from the chair is important, but that's stuff you pretty much already had to a certain extent.
Yep.
The idea of, again, failure is not the right word, but the idea of that I struggled with this the first couple of times, and I'm going to give it another go because I know I'm better than that. So I love that idea. I love that mindset.
Yeah. So, thanks, man. Yeah.
So here we are where again, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you're at a certain point where you're comfortable with how many hours per week you're clinical, you're comfortable with your income, you're comfortable with how the practice has grown. What's the number one pain point for you now?
Yeah, at this point, we're elevating our team leads to be kind of true leaders, right, in the office. And that's going exceptionally well. I think that they're growing at a precipitous rate that I really could not have anticipated in a relatively short amount of time. And so I find myself, we're in this process of systemization, which, anyone who's done it knows that it's kind of onerous and detailed. But, we're having good perspective on it. And so that's even that at this point is not something that's kind of weighing on my mind, because I have a great team that's really handling it. They're doing it. They're doing it for me. And they've got, great coaching, and they're doing what they need to do. And so I find myself as this visionary suddenly with a bunch of time on my hands and, a bunch of energy that I'm not having to put into clinical dentistry or into micromanaging every little thing. I find myself sitting here kind of wondering, like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Because I'm not going to go do more dentistry. And it's never really felt correct to me to own like multiple practices. It's never really been something I've been excited about. And I've had the opportunity several times in my career to do that. And it's just never resonated quite for me. And so really my big pain point is I come into work every day and I'm pretty satisfied with everything we do, but fundamentally I'm an entrepreneur and a visionary. And so I've got to, like, if I'm not breaking something, I'm like, am I even doing anything? Am I even awake? So.
Yeah. So it's funny. I have a good friend from Colorado. His name's Ryan, and he had grown. He's about our age. He had grown this group where it was 7 locations. It was a lot for him to manage, and he ended up selling to private equity. They kept him on as CEO for like 6 months, and then he just left because they were doing things in a way that he didn't agree with. So I was on the phone with him about 2 weeks ago, and he's got more money than he knows what to do with now. But his number one question was, what do I do now? Like he was ready to do a de novo. He was ready to start or acquire another dental practice. And it wasn't because of money, because he's taken care of financially. It was kind of to the point you're making of like, what's getting him out of bed? Like what's motivating him to, what's his sense of purpose? So I think it's awesome that you've already crossed a few things off the list, right? So group ownership, let's call it multi-practice ownership, not for you. Perfect. Unbelievable that you have that kind of clarity, because it's a really expensive road to go down, only to realize that you don't want to go down it.
Sure.
So what other options are there? Well, just thinking at a high level, there's continuing to grow your dental business. There's developing other businesses, even independent of dentistry or maybe associated with dentistry. And then there's the idea of just doing something completely independent of dentistry. Like, is there anything else just on a day-to-day basis that fuels you, that lights your fire?
Yeah. So, I mean, that used to be music for me. I left a career in classical music to become a dentist. And I've thought about that. I've thought about, do I go back into music? And the problems that led me to leave music are still there, right? And so, like, all of the things about it that I didn't enjoy and I knew were unsustainable long term would still be realities if I was to go back and do it now. And so I don't personally, doesn't feel like that would be the correct usage of my time and ability. And I've thought about things in dentistry, right? Like, I've got some coaching clients and things like that, a very small coaching business that I run, that maybe I scale that. Is that something I'm truly passionate about? Does that get me up in the morning, that sort of thing? Not really. It's
right.
Something I like to do, but it's not really something that I think is going to sustain me, and really give me a strong drive and that kind of thing. The idea of just continuing to improve my business as it is and just tweak it to be as great as it can be. I mean, realistically, that's a never-ending journey, right? It's never going to be perfect. Right? We're dealing with people, and they're highly variable, to put it nicely. And you're just never going to get to where you want. You never get to where you want to be, right? If you have high standards and that sort of thing. And so, while that resonates with me a little bit, it doesn't have like the same passion that starting a practice from scratch did, or not from scratch, but buying a new office did, and all that sort of thing. I think there's like a sort of diminishing returns as you scale, as you grow as an entrepreneur, and that sort of thing. And so I have a suspicion that the answer for me to this question, maybe outside of dentistry or maybe outside of business, it may be like it's like, okay, well, how can I maximize other aspects of my life that give me joy and pleasure? How can I maximize my fitness or my health, my joy, my ability, my interpersonal relationships, and that sort of thing? Because that's something that to me is more exciting and more interesting, right? Than, I don't know, getting my EBITDA up 5% or something like that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Like, that stuff is cool, and it's really, like, it's awesome to have a great business that it crushes it and that you're growing and that you're purposeful about. I just reached the point where it doesn't really, like you said, get me out of bed in the morning. Now, making the appropriate changes to live a longer life so I can spend more time with my daughter, like, that's something that is highly important to me. And so that matters a lot. And so I think maybe like having that appropriate perspective, right, through all these things and seeing how changes in the business actually do relate to that and can fuel that or help give me more time to do those things might be closer to the path I need to be on.
I love that, man. I have so many thoughts based on what you just said. First thing is this concept of diminishing returns. 100% agree with it. So you're in this very unique spot, and in my opinion, a very slippery slope where, let's say 30 hours a week working on and in the business. Like that's both clinical and non-clinical. I have no idea what it is, nor do I need to know. But let's say it's 30 hours a week. Yeah, perfect. Let's say it's 30 hours a week. So at that 30 hours, you're at an A, right? Your business is at an A level. To get to an A plus, you're probably going to have to put in another 10, 12, 15 hours, right? And to your point, is it worth it? Probably not, right? So that's a very slippery slope. I would make sure you analyze your time correctly and try everything you can to not go down that slope. I mean, you got to be present. You got to keep an eye on things, and you're doing all of those things. I read a book once. I forget what it was called, but it was on vision and purpose and all of this stuff. And the author unpacked the situation in a really cool way. Was basically like, imagine yourself on an early Saturday morning, and you get up at 5:30, 6 a.m. before anyone else in the house gets up, and you find yourself with this like 2-hour window of time where it's going to be completely undisturbed. What would you do with that time? What is your heart and your gut and your intuition saying that you want to do with that time? And in theory, what you ultimately are drawn to in that 2-hour window on a Saturday morning is your true passion, is what lights you up, is what kind of gets you going. So if you run to the kitchen and you start making breakfast for your family, then maybe you have some like a culinary passion. If it's I'm going to go get a workout in, I'm going to go for a hike or for a run, maybe it has something to do with fitness, and to the point that you were just making, maybe that's it. Like, I know for me personally, I love to read and write. So if I have that 2-hour window, I'm either reading something or I'm writing something. But if I unpack it even more, it's reading and or writing to distill information down for other people. And that's why I love coaching. That's why that's what gets me out of bed. Like that lights me up. So I'll throw that question at you. If and when you have these 2 to 3 hour blocks of time, is it picking up this instrument that you had once, had a great relationship with? Is it something in the culinary space? Is it something in the fitness? Or like what does your intuition tell you it would be?
Yeah. So if I've got 2 hours, purely for myself, or at the start of the day, which I mean, generally most days I do actually, it's like an hour and a half solidly. There are things that I do choose to fill that space with. It's not music. It's listening to music. Yes, I'll always be listening to it in some way, but it's not performing or playing. There's absolutely a strong culinary component, right? I'm the person that does like the vast majority of cooking in my family. I cooked like almost our entire Thanksgiving meal this last week. And that is something I'm deeply passionate about, have been almost my entire life. I still work to master scrambled eggs, every single day, and there's just so many ways. Anyways, and there's always a strong nature component for me. Like I want the ability to connect with nature in some way, whether or not that's just, going and looking at my wife's plants or going in my backyard, and that sort of thing. And then I would say I very often seek out like stillness, I would say. I want quiet, and, once I'm not done listening to music, I want like a quiet space to just sort of reflect and to get my brain going. And then oddly enough, the other thing that came to mind is like interior design, like, which I don't think anybody would have ever guessed, but like, I'm like super into that, like how to arrange your space and how to make spaces functional for you and your family, and do that in a way that's highly aesthetic. And, I guess the art component of that, and how to bring art into your life and to live in a way that is artful, is something that's very important to me as well. So I'm always like looking at interior design and how people organize their spaces and their lives and their houses and their homes and how they connect with nature through design and that sort of stuff. And so those are the things that like I really, if I've got some free time, that's what I'm doing, like 100% of the time.
Yeah, and there's so many rabbit holes you can go down, right, with what you just listed. So if you're really struggling to figure out, quote unquote, what's next, I would definitely meditate on everything that you just said. And I bet after a period of time, something comes to you where you're just like, this would be a cool idea. I mean, even just listening to you, this could be completely off base, but even just listening to you, I'm envisioning like this almost like cafe that is just overwhelmed with like plants and gardening aspects. And then just you in the back, just, cooking breakfast for people that want to come in and just lose a couple hours of their day reading a book and just taking in this serenity while you're making them like a breakfast burrito. Right. So it, like that, I don't know. It just feels right to me, but obviously, that's awesome, man. And I think if you spent some time really just kind of sitting with those thoughts, something would eventually come to you. And then luckily you're in a position where if something comes to you and you give it a crack and you're like, this is the wrong path to go down, then you pivot and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The one thing that you need to do is act, right? You can't just like sit and just be like, well, when's it going to come to me? When's it going to come to me? Like, well, we're all guilty of that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so again, really appreciate you kind of unpacking the story. I think a lot of people will resonate with your journey and some of the decisions that you had to make, and then pivoting back to bringing on another provider, and then just all the blessings that you have in your life now, and a lot of the choices that you're going to have to make here in the coming months and year, and to figure out what you ultimately want to do when you grow up.
I think the plan right now is just to never grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid, so it's no big deal. So I appreciate your perspective here, and you're absolutely right. You must act, right? And I absolutely needed to hear that. Right, you've just got to do something, and I've got plenty of options here.
No doubt. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you back in a few months when I get an update as to what you decided to ultimately do.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
All right, brother. Talk to you soon. Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tanoory, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.